The first time I saw my brother's name on the office door, it was etched in gold. The letters gleamed, bold and certain, as if the world had already decided who deserved to lead. My name was nowhere. Not on the door, not in the minutes of board meetings, not on the lips of the executives who walked past me in the hallway. But I was there. I was always there, earlier than anyone, later than everyone, learning the shape of the company from the inside out. My brother had the title, the corner office, the inherited respect. I had a desk by the window that overlooked the parking lot and a stack of client files that no one wanted to touch. It started quietly. A client called with a problem about a delayed shipment. My brother's assistant transferred the call to me. I listened, took notes, and solved it before lunch. The client called back the next day, asking for me by name. Then another. And another. Soon, my phone rang more than my brother's. The clients didn't care about the name on the door. They cared about results. They cared about someone who remembered their birthdays, who sent handwritten notes, who answered emails at midnight. I became that person not because I wanted to outshine my brother, but because I needed to prove to myself that I belonged. The contracts followed. Small at first, renewals, extensions, modest deals that barely made a dent in the quarterly reports. But each one built trust. Each one added a line to my reputation. Invisible but real. I learned to read the room during negotiations, to sense when a client was hesitating, to know when to push and when to wait. My brother's meetings were formal, scripted, full of buzzwords. Mine were honest, sometimes awkward, but always genuine. The clients noticed. They started inviting me to lunches, to after-hours calls, to family events. I became a fixture in their lives, a name they trusted. Inside the company, little changed. My brother's photo appeared in the annual report. He gave speeches at industry events. He shook hands with politicians and posed for the press. I watched from the back of the room, clapping when expected, blending into the crowd. But in the quiet spaces where deals were made and lost, I was the one people called. I was the one who fixed problems, who found solutions, who remembered the details that mattered. My brother had the spotlight. I had the work. There were moments when I wondered if any of it mattered. If building something quietly, without applause, was worth the effort. But every time a client renewed a contract or referred a friend, I felt something shift. Not pride, exactly, but a sense of purpose. A belief that what I was doing mattered, even if no one else noticed. My brother's world was built on recognition. Mine was built on resilience. One evening as I was packing up, my brother stopped by my desk. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his eyes distant. "You're working late again," he said. I nodded. He hesitated, as if searching for something to say. "Clients seem to like you," he added, almost as an afterthought. I smiled, not sure what to say. He left without waiting for a reply. That night, I sat in my car, staring at the building. The gold letters on the door glowed in the dark, a reminder of everything I didn't have. But my phone buzzed with a message from a client, thanking me for saving their business. I realized then that titles could be given, but trust had to be earned. And I was earning it, one client at a time. The city outside was alive with possibility. I wasn't the one with the title, but I was the one making things happen. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The first contract I closed on my own wasn't impressive on paper. It was a small logistics firm, the kind of client the company usually overlooked. But for me, it was a start. I spent hours listening to their needs, not just the numbers, but the frustrations and ambitions that never made it into formal proposals. They told me about missed deadlines, unreliable partners, and the pressure to grow in a market that didn't forgive mistakes. I offered solutions, not promises. When they signed, they shook my hand with relief, not ceremony. That handshake meant more to me than any title ever could. Word spread quietly. Other clients, tired of being treated like line items, started calling. They didn't ask for the CEO. They asked for the person who listened. My brother noticed the shift. He called me into his office, the first time he'd done so since taking over. The room was immaculate, his desk empty except for a single framed photo of our father. He looked at me, searching for something. Maybe an explanation, maybe a threat. "You're spending a lot of time with the smaller accounts," he said. I nodded. He waited for me to justify myself, but I didn't. The silence stretched. Finally, he dismissed me with a wave, as if I were a distraction. That night, I met with a group of clients at a modest restaurant. No suits, no speeches, just real conversation. They talked about their businesses, their fears, their hopes for the future. I listened, asked questions, and took notes on napkins. One client, a woman who ran a family bakery, confided that she was considering closing after a string of bad months. I offered to help her renegotiate terms with suppliers, to connect her with other clients who might need her services. She looked at me like no one had ever offered her real help before. That moment stayed with me. Back at the office, I became known as the person who handled the difficult cases. The ones that didn't fit the standard mold, the ones that required patience and creativity. My brother's team focused on the big deals, the ones that made headlines. I focused on the people behind the numbers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Every success felt earned, every failure personal. Tension grew between us. My brother began to question my methods in meetings, sometimes in front of the entire team. He accused me of wasting resources, of undermining the company's image by associating with small players. I kept my responses brief. I let the results speak for themselves. The clients I brought in stayed. They referred others. The contracts grew in value, slowly but steadily. Still, my brother's name was the one on the reports, the one the board praised. One afternoon, I received a call from a major client threatening to leave over a botched delivery. My brother was out, unreachable. I took responsibility, apologized, and offered a solution before the client could finish venting. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The client decided to stay, citing my willingness to own the mistake as the reason. When my brother returned, he barely acknowledged what had happened. But the client sent a letter to the board, mentioning me by name. That letter changed things. For the first time, the board asked about my role in the company. My brother downplayed it, but the question had been raised. I felt a shift, not in power but in perception. People started to see me as more than just the person behind the scenes. They started to wonder what I could do if given the chance. But recognition brought new challenges. Some colleagues resented my growing influence. Rumors spread that I was trying to take over, that I was undermining my brother on purpose. I ignored the whispers, focusing on the work. The clients needed me. The contracts needed to be signed. The market didn't care about office politics. Through it all, I kept moving forward. Every day brought new problems, new opportunities, new reasons to keep going. I wasn't chasing a title. I was building something real, something that couldn't be erased by a nameplate on a door. And with every client who chose to stay, I felt my resolve harden. This was my path, and I was determined to walk it, no matter who tried to block the way. The boardroom was colder than usual, filled with the low hum of voices and the clatter of coffee cups. My brother sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the quarterly reports. I took my usual seat near the end, unnoticed by most, but not by everyone. Over the past months, the pattern had changed. Colleagues who once ignored me now watched with a mix of curiosity and caution. The letter from the client had made its impact. My brother's confidence seemed thinner, his tone sharper. The meeting started with routine numbers, but it didn't take long for tension to surface. A director questioned the loss of a long-standing account. My brother deflected, blaming market conditions. I listened, waiting, until another director asked about the increase in client retention among smaller contracts. My name came up, quietly but unmistakably. My brother's jaw tightened. He acknowledged my efforts, but the words felt forced, as if admitting anything positive about me cost him something. I kept my expression neutral, focusing on the facts. The board wanted results, not drama. After the meeting, my brother called me into his office. He closed the door with more force than necessary. "You're making waves," he said, voice low. "That's not always a good thing." I met his gaze, steady. Clients stay because they feel heard. That's all I'm doing." He shook his head, frustration flickering across his features. "You're changing the way things work here. Not everyone likes change." I understood the warning, but I also knew I couldn't go back to being invisible. The next weeks brought new challenges. A major contract, long considered untouchable, was suddenly at risk. The client, a multinational with deep pockets and high expectations, demanded immediate attention after a series of miscommunications. My brother assigned his top team, but the situation worsened. I watched from the sidelines, feeling the weight of the company's future pressing in. Late one night, I received an email from the client's representative. She asked for a meeting. Just me, no one else. We met in a quiet conference room, the city lights flickering outside. She spoke plainly. "We're considering leaving. You're the only one who's listened." I didn't make promises. I outlined what could be done, what couldn't, and what I'd personally oversee. She nodded, her expression softening. "You're different from your brother," she said. "You make things feel possible." The next morning, the client agreed to stay, but only if I became their direct point of contact. This decision sent shockwaves through the company. My brother, blindsided, confronted me in front of the executive team. "You're undermining my authority," he accused. I stood my ground. "I'm keeping the business." The room fell silent. For the first time, the hierarchy felt fragile, as if the old rules no longer applied. Some colleagues sided with my brother, others with me. Lines were drawn, alliances shifted. The pressure mounted. Rumors swirled about a possible restructuring. The board called for an emergency meeting to address the growing divide. My brother lobbied for unity, for tradition, for respect for the chain of command. I spoke about adaptability, about the need to evolve, about the value of listening to clients at every level. The debate was heated, emotions raw. In the end, the board postponed any decision, urging us to find common ground. Outside the boardroom, the atmosphere was tense. Some coworkers avoided me, others offered quiet words of support. I focused on the work, on the clients who still called late at night, on the contracts that needed renewal. The sense of isolation grew, but so did my determination. Every challenge felt like a test, every setback a lesson in resilience. I began to see that the real battle was not for a title, but for the right to shape the company's future. One evening, as I prepared to leave, I found a note on my desk. It was from my brother. "Meet me on the roof," it read. I hesitated, unsure what to expect. When I arrived, he was already there, looking out over the city. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned, his expression softer than I'd seen in years. "I never expected you to fight this hard," he admitted. "I never wanted to fight at all," I replied. "I just wanted to matter." He nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. Maybe we both want the same thing, but in different ways. The distance between us felt smaller, but the challenges ahead loomed larger than ever. As I left the roof, I realized the next move would define not just my future, but the future of everyone who depended on the company. The stakes had never been higher, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The company felt like a pressure cooker. Every corridor conversation was loaded, every meeting a test of loyalty. My brother and I barely spoke except in public, where our words were measured and our faces unreadable. The board's indecision had left a vacuum, and uncertainty seeped into every department. Some employees clung to tradition, wary of change. Others gravitated toward me, drawn by the promise of a different way of doing things. The divide was no longer hidden. It was the undercurrent of every interaction. The largest client, the one whose account had nearly slipped away, now demanded a new contract, one that would redefine the company's future. The terms were ambitious, the risks high, but the rewards could transform our standing in the market. My brother insisted on handling negotiations himself. He prepared presentations, rehearsed speeches, and gathered his most loyal team members. I watched from the sidelines, knowing that my approach, quiet persistence, listening, adapting, had been what saved the relationship in the first place. On the day of the negotiation, the boardroom was packed. My brother opened with authority, outlining the company's strengths and legacy. The client listened politely, but their questions were pointed, their patience thin. When my brother stumbled over a detail, the lead client turned to me. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. All eyes shifted. I answered honestly, addressing the risks, proposing solutions, and acknowledging the work still to be done. The client nodded, her trust clear. My brother's frustration was palpable, but he stayed silent. After the meeting, the board called us in separately. They wanted explanations for the division, assurances that the company would not fracture under the weight of our rivalry. I spoke about the need for evolution, about the danger of clinging to old models in a changing market. My brother argued for stability, for respect for the hierarchy that had built the company's reputation. The board listened, their faces unreadable. That night I stayed late, reviewing the contract and drafting proposals. My brother appeared in the doorway, his expression weary. "We can't keep doing this," he said quietly. I looked up, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "Neither of us wanted this fight," I replied. He nodded, sinking into the chair across from me. For a moment, the weight of expectation lifted, and we spoke, not as rivals but as brothers. We remembered our father's lessons, his belief that the company was more than a name or a title. It was about people, about trust, about building something that would last. The next morning, we presented a united front to the board. We outlined a plan that combined my brother's vision with my approach to client relationships. The proposal was bold, risky, but honest. The board deliberated for hours. When the decision came, it was clear. The company would move forward with both of us leading, each bringing our strengths to the table. The title would remain with my brother, but I would take charge of client strategy and market growth. The announcement sent ripples through the company. Some celebrated, others grumbled, but the message was clear. Change was coming, and it would be guided by both tradition and innovation. My brother and I shared a quiet moment in his office, the tension between us replaced by a cautious respect. We knew the real work was just beginning, but for the first time, it felt like we were on the same side. As I left the office that evening, the city outside seemed different. Full of possibility, not just for me, but for everyone who believed in the company's future. The fight for recognition had changed me. I was no longer content to work in the shadows. I had earned my place, not through titles or applause, but through resilience and the trust of those who mattered most. And as the company prepared for its next chapter, so did I. Ready to lead, ready to build, ready to prove that sometimes the clients, the contracts, and the market matter more than any title ever could. Change did not erase the past, but it gave everyone a chance to build something new. The first weeks of the new arrangement were turbulent. Some employees struggled to adapt, clinging to old routines and familiar hierarchies. Others embraced the shift, eager to see if promises of collaboration and innovation would become reality. My brother and I worked side by side, not as rivals, but as partners with different strengths. There were awkward moments, old habits die slowly, but we learned to trust each other's judgment. We debated, disagreed, and sometimes raised our voices, but every conversation now ended with a solution, not a stalemate. Clients noticed the difference. Meetings became more productive, negotiations more transparent. Contracts were no longer just transactions. They became opportunities to build lasting partnerships. I reached out to clients who had once been on the verge of leaving, inviting them to share their concerns directly. My brother, once distant in his approach, began to listen more, to ask questions, to see the value in relationships that went beyond numbers on a spreadsheet. The company's reputation shifted. We were no longer just a legacy firm with a famous name at the top. We were a team that delivered results and cared about the people behind every deal. The board monitored our progress closely. At first, they were skeptical, wary that our cooperation might unravel under pressure. But as the months passed, the company's performance improved. Client retention reached new highs. We secured contracts that had once seemed out of reach, not by undercutting competitors, but by offering something rare: consistency, honesty, and a willingness to adapt. My brother and I presented quarterly results together, each acknowledging the other's contributions. The applause from the boardroom felt different now, earned, not expected. Outside the office, the changes were just as real. My brother and I began to reconnect beyond work. We shared dinners, laughed about old stories, and found common ground in our hopes for the future. The rivalry that had defined us for so long faded, replaced by a quiet respect. Our family noticed the difference. Our mother, once worried that the business would tear us apart, smiled more often, her relief unmistakable. The company's culture changed too. Employees saw that growth did not have to mean division. Teams collaborated across departments, sharing ideas and supporting each other through setbacks. Mistakes were addressed openly, not hidden or ignored. The atmosphere shifted from cautious to optimistic. New hires arrived eager to contribute, drawn by the company's reputation for resilience and integrity. The market responded. Our share of business grew not just in numbers but in influence. We became known as the firm that listened, that delivered, that turned challenges into opportunities. Looking back, I understood that titles and recognition could open doors, but they could not build trust or loyalty. Those were earned, day by day, through actions and choices. My brother still had the title, and he wore it well. But I had something just as valuable: the clients, the contracts, and the market's respect. I had proven to myself and to everyone watching that resilience mattered more than status, and that real leadership was measured by the strength of the relationships you built. As the company prepared to celebrate its anniversary, my brother and I stood together on stage. He introduced me not as his sibling, but as the architect of the company's new era. The applause was loud, but what mattered most was the quiet pride in his voice. In that moment, I realized the journey had changed us both. We were no longer defined by rivalry, but by what we had built together. And as I looked out at the faces of our team, our clients, and our family, I knew that the future would be shaped not by titles, but by the choices we made every day. The market would keep changing. Challenges would keep coming. But now I was ready. We were ready. And that was enough.